Lisa,
Yes, baby girl.
when I grow up, I want to be a WOMENACE to society.
And so shall you be. Hey, this is Lisa Landry. Welcome back to A Menace to Society. I am so thrilled to speak with today's guest. She is the managing attorney at DV Leap. Please welcome to the podcast, Sasha Drobnick. Hi, Sasha.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Your organization is celebrating 15 years. What are you celebrating, Sasha?
Gosh, we're celebrating 15 years of fighting the good fight on behalf of survivors of domestic violence. We were founded by Joan Meier, who's the law professor at George Washington University Law School 15 years ago, and we've grown in terms of our capacity, the type of work we do, and the impact that we're making.
What's your mission at DV Leap?
We provide pro bono appellate assistance to survivors of family violence and their children. We represent survivors who have had adverse outcomes at the trial level, and what that practically means typically is either they've applied for a protective order to prevent them from an abusive partner and that protective order has been denied, or they are in family court with a custody matter trying to protect themselves and or their children from the other parent who is abusive, and again the custody order has not adequately protected them, so either given unsafe access to the children or actually taken custody away from the mom seeking protection. So when those court cases go wrong, we help the survivor appeal to the higher court and try to get those wrong decisions overturned.
How do you do that? How do you go to a higher court?
It's actually a pretty long, involved process. What we do is if a survivor comes to us having suffered a poor outcome in her case, the first thing we need to do is to review the written transcripts from the case to see if there were errors that were preserved in the record. And what that means is if the judge made an error during trial, either the attorney or if the survivor isn't represented, which unfortunately is often the case, the survivor herself has to let the judge know that she objects so that that error is preserved in the record. And what the thinking behind that is that the trial judges are supposed to be allowed to correct their own mistakes, given the opportunity to do that. So if the judge makes an error, if it is preserved in the record through an objection, then we will, when we're reviewing the transcripts, we'll flag that and identify whether or not we think that there's a viable appeal there. And if there is, we partner with a pro bono law firm. We have a large network of pro bono law firm partners. Because we're a tiny nonprofit, we're able to leverage their resources and take appeals all over the country. So the next step is to write a brief that identifies what the errors are and why they are errors, and argues hopefully persuasively as to why the case should be overturned and sent back to the trial court.
So what happens if your lawyer doesn't raise an objection or if it doesn't get documented?
So it's a great question, and it's a huge problem because it doesn't happen quite often. Aside from providing our appellate representation, another aspect of our work is trainings, and we do trainings all over the country on how to make a record for appeal and how to bring those objections in a timely way. If the attorney didn't do that, then oftentimes it's that error is considered waived and a court won't address it on appeal. There are exceptions to that if the error is so, I won't get into the legal standards, but it has to be pretty outrageous and it has to obviously affect the rights of the survivor in order for the court to disregard the fact that it wasn't preserved.
Well, that sounds really messy.
Yeah. That's a good word for it, yes.
Complex, right? Isn't that what they call it in legal terms? I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But they call it a complex case?
Yeah, it's complex. It's a lot of getting in the weeds of what went on in trial. But at the same time, it also is an opportunity to think really deeply and creatively about how to either use the law or make the law work the way it's supposed to.
Do you see a lot of bad legal choices in your work?
I'm going to not call it bad necessarily. I think one of the phenomena of particularly family court and cases where there are allegations of family violence. Those cases are very difficult and they're very unique. And I was a family law attorney before I came to DV Leap, so I've been in the middle of those, and I can understand kind of how overwhelming these cases can be. And the courts tend to be very hostile toward allegations of domestic violence.
Why is
And
that? I don't want to interrupt you, but what the heck is that? Like, what is the deficit?
Know.
What is the cognitive dissonance that people can't recognize these things happen? Is it because they don't want to take responsibility for their own actions?
So maybe, yes. I'll put my feminist hat on and say I think a lot of it is underlying patriarchal norms, right? Because these allegations are overwhelmingly brought by moms and women, and there's sort of a knee-jerk disbelief that it's just, either this woman is being hysterical and making it up, or she's being vengeful because she's trying to get a leg up in her custody. But there is an overt hostility to these allegations that makes litigating them all more difficult.
But it would seem really simple. If someone's telling you this is happening and you have documentation to support your speech, what's the deficit? I don't understand it.
Well, so that's documentation. That's an issue, right? Because with domestic violence, there's a lot of times not a whole lot of evidence. Domestic violence is private and happens in the home and in the bedroom and in places where there's not a lot of witnesses. And so unless you've got blood and black and blue, which oftentimes there's not. I mean, there's so much more to domestic violence than severe physical violence. Then it's very difficult to prove. And if you've got a judge who's skeptical to begin with, and you can't come up with some really shocking medical evidence, then you're fighting an uphill battle.
And then you have to hope too that you had a not hack attorney who actually provided your supporting evidence to the judge.
Exactly. And who actually understands domestic violence and understands even when their own client may be acting sort of counterintuitively about talking about their experience. There are a lot of layers to be addressing in these cases. So it's hard. It's hard for the attorneys. But yeah, there are a lot of probably otherwise really good family law attorneys who aren't doing so great on these cases.
Well, because the judges don't have all their materials in front of them to make judicious decisions. And then they might have a bias on top of that, or they might be trusting in these people who are giving them information, but the lawyers aren't telling the truth. But the judge doesn't know.
Exactly.
Wow.
There's a lot of contingencies, right?
So you have a lot of layers to work through. How many people are on your staff, Sasha?
Not enough. We have, well, it's a big deal because we now have a new executive director who's been with us for about a year and a half now. So our founder no longer has to wear every single hat in the organization. So we have an executive director. Our founder, Joan Meier, is now our legal director. And I'm not even, well, technically not full-time, although I am full-time. And then we have one consulting attorney, and that's it. And then we have a lovely assistant who's kind of helping us with social media now. But we're a pretty small shop.
That's a lot of work for a very small staff.
Yeah, it is. Now, our model of partnering with pro bono law firms, as I said before, that's a super effective model because we can then access and leverage all the resources of these big law firms, so that helps a lot. So we let them do the brief production, if you will, so actually getting it out the door and getting it to the courts and making all the copies and doing the major drafting. So we've been able to use that model to our advantage, but yeah, it's still a lot.
The divorce industry is a $50 billion a year industry. Do you ever feel like you're up against a money-making machine?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not just the divorce industry. I mean, I think that the forensics in these custody cases, the evaluators, oftentimes that's the money-making machine because you can hire these experts and they get paid a whole lot of money, and usually it's the parent with the money that's paying them, and so that may or may not have an influence on kind of where their recommendations lean.
Oh, you mean bias? Are you saying that there's bias out there?
Oh, yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, there have been studies done about how, if you're being paid by someone that affects your bias, that creates bias. So that's no mystery there. So but it is, there's a lot of money to be made in divorce attorneys and in custody evaluators and all of that.
So this seems like a very unregulated market kind of to me. Like, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a financial background, but it just seems like a very unethical system that's happening. Because if you have people who are being influenced by money, and then you have bias against victims, and you have lawyers who aren't presenting the actual evidence of what's going on in these situations, how do you find justice?
Within all of that mess, there's the good actors, right? So there are the good attorneys that are fight for what they should be fighting for, and,
Yes.
and there are judges, although they're not as many as you would want, that actually are being objective in the way they assess the evidence. So I don't want to paint it like it's all corrupt bad actors,
No.
but there is a lack of regulation, and judges are given, especially in family law cases, a huge degree of discretion in terms of how they assess the evidence and make their decisions. And it's just very difficult to impose any kind of standards. There's a lot of self-regulation. You can file complaints against judges, that never goes anywhere. You can file complaints against attorneys, that equally never goes anywhere. So it is a bit of the Wild West, and we hope that by doing as many trainings as we can to judges and to attorneys and to evaluators, and at the same time bringing these appeals, which, if successful, not only help the client, the individual survivor, but also creates law that's more protective that the judges have to follow going forward. Hopefully, our goal is to be kind of creating reform so it isn't as bad as it is now.
That's good. No, I've spoken with a lot of activists and a lot of lawyers on this podcast. I'm very, very appreciative for their time and their information. And, I've just kind of, again, I'm not a legal person, but how the heck is this constitutional if you don't have any regulation and it's a court of law? But you said wild, wild west. And I've heard that term from other lawyers to describe family court situations that are counterintuitive to justice. How do we fix it if it's not even constitutional in the first place?
Well, the constitutional questions they're big questions. Both parents have fundamental constitutional rights to raise their kids. Unfortunately, kids don't have their own independent constitutional right, which is a whole nother subject that I could go off on. But
yeah, we need a civil rights movement for children. We really do.
Oh man, do we?
Yep.
Yeah, they don't have a voice.
Nope.
That's the other piece of this is you've got kids who just nobody's listening.
Even when the kids are documenting abuse, nobody's listening. They don't take it seriously. They think the kid's lying. They don't believe it.
The mother is brainwashing them. Yeah. But I will tell you, there is a hopeful, so if you want to talk about, constitutional or at least legislative reform, we DV Leap, and in collaboration with several other organizations, were behind a successful push to get federal legislation passed this fall that it's not binding. It's House Concurrent Resolution 72, but it focuses on protecting kids in family courts, and it makes some very affirmative statements with the backing of the House of Representatives that courts need to address child safety before they move on to looking at child's best interests. I mean, that seems like it wouldn't have to be said out loud, but that's actually a real problem. So if there's an abuse allegation, the allegation of abuse has to be addressed and either confirmed or denied before you start doing an analysis of which parent has the kid's best interest in mind. This legislation also imposes requirements about professionals who are involved in family court cases where there are allegations of abuse. They need to have the proper training. It recommends, again, this doesn't have any binding authority, but it recommends that fees for those third-party professionals are allocated after judgment's been made. So there's, and that scientific theories, and I say scientific in quotes, scientific theories that are being used have to have actual legitimacy to them.
You mean like a scientific basis with research, like case study work, instead of just parental alienation syndrome and debunk other
alienation.
baloney?
Yes, whatever euphemism for parental alienation that we see. Yeah. So
Well,
that's just such a big problem in our cases, these theories that the mom, whenever a mom, and it is usually a mom, is alleging abuse, that the other parent, which is usually the dad who is the alleged abuser, can just turn around and say, oh no, she's lying, she's trying to alienate me from the kid, she's a parental alienator. And it's just this perfectly packaged defense. It's very powerful.
Well, then you take that on top of the people being paid to give evaluations. How does a kid have a fighting chance to be heard?
Yep. That's the problem.
Well, I'm glad y'all are out there. Excuse me, I'm glad you guys are out there. I know you're in DC, so let me use my proper English. I'm glad your organization is out there making a difference, Sasha.
Well, thank you.
So what is some of this training that you have for judges out there? What are you doing? Because I'm sure a lot of these judges want to do the right thing, and they just don't have the training.
I wish that were the case, but judges get domestic violence training, I think, in every state. I mean, it is not rare for judges to have proper training in domestic violence. It is rare for the judges to actually internalize it in a more sophisticated way. I mean, I think judges, when they think of domestic violence, they still are only interested in domestic violence where there's blood or broken bones. And so as much as there has been training on coercive control and how physical violence is just a small fraction of domestic violence, and how a single incident isn't domestic violence, it's looking at a pattern of control, of abusing power, that we don't see that translating into court practices or how judges assess evidence. So we do trainings on what domestic violence is, the fact that domestic violence is very harmful to children, even if they aren't the direct recipients of it, or even if they aren't directly exposed to it, but are in a home where there's domestic violence. We do those trainings for judges and advocates and attorneys, and lots of other organizations are doing those trainings too, but I'll tell you, they're not, for the judges at least, they're not having the impact that you would hope that it would have.
That's very sad.
Yeah.
Because you would think, this is a judge. This is somebody who is supposed to look at the evidence and come to a fair decision for both parents and any children involved. Obviously, dads cannot be cut out of children's lives. Children need both parents if that's a good circumstance,
If it's safe, right?
Yeah, if it's
So
safe.
of course children need good parents, but they need good parents. They need to be safe with each parent. So, if you're not safe, then that's not a good, healthy parental relationship.
Now, if you got somebody who's psychologically abusive, they're sick and twisted, and that child is in that environment constantly, that child is going to grow up with complex PTSD and a host of other adverse effects, one would think.
Right.
It just seems like common sense. I mean, most of us have had an unhappy childhood.
In some respects, right?
Right. But then you think about an overwhelmingly unhappy childhood. I mean, who's taking these guns to schools, It's it's the kid who never got help, who's been shouting out, I need help, and gets turned down and silenced and left with an abusive parent. It's got to mess up your head.
Absolutely.
Well, what's next, Sasha? What are y'all working on over at DV Leap?
We've got a handful of appeals in various stages and covering lots of different topics. We have one appeal that we're hoping that we'll get an oral argument soon, which involves a mom who's been cut off from her kid because the little boy alleged that the dad was sexually abusing him, and the mom believed the little boy, God forbid, and so, the mom was, of course, accused of alienating, and even though they didn't find that the mom did anything wrong or didn't even try to coach, they found that her anxiety was enough to be influencing the kid to make up these allegations of abuse. So,
you mean because she was upset her kid was being harmed? She got anxious about it,
Yeah.
so she must be lying, huh? Because she was emotionally reacting to her child being abused.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's your textbook alienation case, right? So we've got that happening. We've got an appeal in Tennessee where we were the amicus, a friend of court.
Is that what that means? Amicus?
Yeah, it literally means friend of the court, and that's where you're contributing a brief in support of an issue, which usually is in support of one of the parties, but you're a neutral party and you're just speaking more broadly, representing the community's views on this particular issue. So
you're coming in with a big smile and a hug and some smart stuff?
right. We can throw a little research, throw a little, the scholarly literature, and come in. So we're case in Tennessee where the judge admitted that the dad was abusive to both the mom and the kids. The dad admitted to it. He stipulated to a federal crime behind him, and he had to stipulate to the domestic violence. But the judge nonetheless said, but I want to make sure we make this custody 50-50. He said this from the outset, I'm going to make sure that we make this as equal as possible.
Wait. So the dad was like, he was a federal criminal? Like he was a money launderer, or he ran insurance scams?
He had some kind of, I can't remember what his thing was, but he had some felony going on. Yeah,
wow.
He had done, right. It wasn't a violent crime, but it was a
white-collar psychopath
felony,
type of thing?
Nonetheless.
Okay, got it. Okay.
But I mean, it's a good example because Tennessee has a pretty good statute, and the statute says if there's domestic violence, you have to consider the domestic violence. You have to limit the domestic violence perpetrator's time to protect the kids, and that statute didn't make a difference to this judge. He said from the outset, he's like, I just want to make sure we're being fair to both parents here. We want to make sure there's 50-50, and that's what he did, 50-50. So
the kid needs to learn how to embezzle money. Half the time. The kid can be taught integrity and ethics the other half the time.
The other half the time, right? They gotta be well-rounded.
Gotta have balance. Namaste. So now the judge decided that he made a mistake and he's willing to relook at the evidence. That's great. People evolve.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. We'll see. In that case, it was interesting because the appeals court actually asked us as amicus organization to participate in the oral argument, which is super unusual. They usually don't want to hear from the amicus organization, so it says that the appeals court at least is taking this seriously and is concerned.
That's fantastic.
Right?
That's real progress right there, Yeah,
exactly. So it's like you got to take those little wins, and hopefully that'll translate into a good decision. And, we also have our founder, Joan Meier, is in the very last stages of a federal grant where she's doing research on alienation and abuse claims in family court. And it's the first empirical research on that subject that have ever been undertaken. So that's really exciting. So those results, her final results, should be coming out I think in the next 2 or 3 months.
That is really exciting because if you take away all the emotion, and I would imagine a lot of these cases are very emotional. There's a lot of he said, she said. There's a lot of bias that all humans have a bias, So you've got all this all this synergy of complex, messed up, But if you can actually put science into the equation and show that there is empirical data, it removes a lot of blinders, doesn't it? In theory?
It should, right? It should.
It's like 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident, so chew it.
Yeah, so that's the idea. So, and hopefully that will have some impact as well. We're super excited. I think I'm allowed to say this because we announced it today. The actor and advocate, and I think she's director too, Abigail Spencer, is agreed to be DV Leap's ambassador for this year, which is really exciting for us.
That's great.
Very passionate about domestic violence issues, and so it's really exciting.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thanks.
How can people get involved with DV Leap, or how can people access Joan Meier's new research when it comes out?
Oh, that's a great question. So our website is www.dvleap.org, so DVLEAP. So that's a great way to get involved. If you want to give us money, we'll always say yes to that. But we also have on our website a database of all of our briefs and the court opinions that anyone can access and use. And all of Joan's research, she's, in addition to this research that's coming out, she's written extensively on parental alienation and has done a lot of other scholarly work, and that's all on our website as well. It's a great resource for anyone.
I spoke to another activist. She is reforming family court in Pennsylvania, and she was telling me that they have a hard time getting these stories onto local media or into national media channels. Do you have that same frustration?
We are aware of that frustration. We don't, because we're litigators, and if cases that are in litigation, it's not a good idea to try going to the media at that stage, because there's all sorts of ways that can backfire. So that's not something that we're typically trying to promote. But yes, I'm aware of the difficulty in getting objective media coverage. I know Joan did she did an interview for, I think it was 2020, maybe a year and a half ago, and the way that it actually came out was edited so that, I don't know what they did with it, but it didn't come out the way she actually performed the interview, and kind of the upshot was a very different message, and it was a lot more of a kind of a father's tilt than it was a survivor's tilt. So I think a lot of the mainstream media, it's hard to get them to listen and to tell that story. I will say that Fox News LA has, going back a few years now, they did a wonderful story called Lost in the System that followed several protective moms and their kids and their stories. And it's one of the few long, comprehensive media coverage examples that really did give the survivors a voice and tell the story. But other than that, it's hard. It's not sexy. It's not something you really want to hear about.
That's ironic, though, that Fox would cover such a topic, and yet 2020 would splice Joan Meier into a counterintuitive interview.
It is indeed. Yeah.
Bizarro world.
I think it's just driven. I think a lot of it is driven by the people that Fox series was driven by an investigative reporter who actually has since passed away under really curious and unsettling circumstances, but he was the one really pushing that. So I think a lot of times, if you can find someone within a network who is passionate and who understands, then that's the driving force.
Passion and understanding are two great traits to have, especially when you're doing such great work. Thank you for your advocacy, Sasha.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for talking to me.
And good luck with everything you guys are doing at DV Leap. And I hope you'll come back and speak to me in the future.
Oh, I would love that.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And if you want to check out DV Leap, please do so online. Joan Meier is quite a remarkable attorney and researcher. Thanks so much for tuning in, y'all. Please join me at lisalandry.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll know when each new podcast drops every WOMENACE Wednesday. Shout out Ari Bear. It's snowing today. Have fun.